Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament. We are now in the book of James. I've been in there for a few days now, and we are going to be today in James 2, verses 1 through 13. And we're looking at this is James gives a warning against prejudices. And I think this is a good message. Well, obviously, I mean, it's in the Bible, so it's a good message. But I think this is good for today. I think it applies for this day and age just as much as it applied back then, maybe in a different ways, but I think in a lot very similar ways that we're going to look at. And I'm going to read this again. Like I said, I know in the past lengthier stuff I've not read, but I want to read James because there's a lot of theological stuff. There's a lot of, as some people would say, a lot of meat in James. And so I want to dive into these and read these as we go through them so we have a full understanding inside the videos of what we're looking at. And so we'll do that today. So James 2, verses 1 through 13. He says, "My dear brothers and sisters, how can you claim to have faith in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ if you favor some people over others? For example, suppose someone comes into your work meeting dressed in fancy clothes and expensive jewelry, and another comes in who is poor and dressed in dirty clothes. If you give special attention and a good seat to the rich person, but you say to the poor one, you can stand over there or else sit on the floor, well, doesn't this discrimination show that your judgments are guided by evil motives?" And I want to hit on that a lot. Listen to me, verse 5. Listen to me, dear brothers and sisters. Hasn't God chosen the poor in this world to be rich in faith? Aren't they the ones who will inherit the kingdom he promised to those who love him? But you dishonor the poor. Isn't it the rich who oppress you and drag you into court? Aren't they the ones who slander Jesus Christ, whose noble name you bear? Yes, indeed, it is good when you obey the royal law as found in the scriptures. Love your neighbor as yourself. But if you favor some people over others, you are committing a sin. Pay attention to that. You are guilty of breaking the law. For the person who keeps all of the laws except for one is as guilty as a person who has broken all of God's laws. There's a lot in that. There's a lot in every single one of these, and I'm not going to be able to get into every single verse. But I mean, think about that. Think about that for a minute, right? It doesn't matter if you've broken one law or all of them. You're still just as guilty. For the same God who said you must not commit adultery also said you must not murder. So if you murder someone but you do not commit adultery, you've still broken the law. So whatever you say or whatever you do, remember that you will be judged by the law that sets you free. There will be no mercy for those who have not shown mercy to others, but if you have been merciful, God will be merciful when he judges. And so there's a lot to take in this little section, you know, this 13 verses. Sorry, I have trouble getting that out today. But it's mainly a warning against prejudice, right? And I would say like racism too. I think you know this kind of stuff really he's focusing on the poor versus the rich. But I think really you could apply this in any setting. I'm sure they would have applied it back then to like Jew and Gentile and those type of things. And so I want to look at this as a whole when we're looking at this, not just beyond the poor and the rich side of this, but the whole aspect of, are you showing favoritism to a certain group of people when they show up to your church versus another group of people when they show up to your church? And so James in here is arguing that favoritism for the against the favoritism. I'm sorry. Um, Against people, right? Against, you know, favoring one group of people or a particular person over another, and he condemns this. He is condemning these acts of favoritism, and often, right, we get caught up in this. We treat like, you know, you see someone pull into your parking lot or wherever you meet for church, and they're driving some sports car or fancy, you know, exotic, luxury vehicle, and you see these impressive people, walking in, and you tend to go to them, right? You're gonna greet them, shake their hand. Oh, you're welcome here, right? And a lot of times there's a motive behind that because hey, there's probably a good contribution behind this guy. And now some dirty looking mangy homeless guy who comes walking up, right? What are you gonna do? Now you might will say hi to him, but you're going to keep an eye on him, right? If he sits in the back, you're probably going to have some of your security or your ushers, sit close to him and keep an eye on him, and who knows? You may even ask him, to sit somewhere else based on where he chooses to sit down to. And it's like, oh my goodness, why? No, we wouldn't do this, but we do. We do this every day, right? Whether it's in our churches or whether it's out in public, we do this every day. We judge people by the way they look. Now, that's hard sometimes, right? It's hard sometimes not to, and we've got to be careful about that. And there's some legitimacy to this, but at the same time, we've got to be very, very careful with how we treat people. Because here's the thing: I've seen this backfire so bad. I've seen this backfire so bad. I have seen people who, the nice looking, well looking, nice driving, nice car couple comes in, and a lot of attention's paid to them, and that ends up being horrible for the congregation, right? Whereas I've seen some very poor, very low to say down to earth people, if you want to put it that way, salt of the earth type people. I think sometimes is the expression that's used, and they've come in, and I've seen them do more for a church with very little money than the people that come in and have lots of money do. And so and then again, I've seen a lot of times, very few times have I ever seen someone who's poor threaten to leave the church or take their money away, right? And, they're not going to do that. But I have seen where people cater to the rich in a church, and those who have money in a church, and it's like, oh well, we've got to do the things that they want to do, because if they don't, then they'll stop giving. I can't tell you how many times I've seen that, or I've heard those discussions, things like that in meetings and stuff like that. And so this is the kind of stuff that destroys a church, right? The church isn't going to grow whenever you're doing the will of a couple people because they're the ones giving the money, right? I mean, it's just not. And so that's not what God wants for the church. And so this is the kind of stuff that James is warning of against here. And the same thing applies to race, right? If you favor one particular race over another when they come into your church, I mean, that goes beyond anything that we were supposed to do, or supposed to be called to do. And I've talked about this before. I really think this is one of the things we've got to work on as a church. And I know sometimes it's easy to get caught up in, but man, the church is supposed to be a very diverse place, and anymore the church is not. And that's the number one place it should be in this world. And so we need to make sure we get there. And um, so going back to this, I'm sorry, I went off track a little bit. We look at this, and we see the irony that James reminds us of here, is that in this is that the supposed winners, right, the people that they want to be associated with, gained a lot of their impressive lifestyle at the expense of the people that's trying to gain their attention. And so also, even Jesus reminds us that it is the rich often find it more difficult to identify with the Lord Jesus, right? Who came as a humble servant. Not to say that they can. And again, I've talked about this before. There's nothing wrong with being rich. There's not. The Bible does talk about that it's harder for the rich to come to Christ and those type of things. But um, and Jesus did seem to have more of a heart for the poor and those things and and people like that. And I get that, and I understand why. And so we got to make sure we don't get caught up in that. And so we need to make sure, like, one, you're not impressed by status, wealth, and fame, and do that. We've seen the churches that have done that, right? I mean, there's documentaries on it. There's all this kind of stuff on the churches that have done that, and the horrible consequences that came of it, and how it harmed the church. This horrible. And so we've got to make sure that we don't get caught up, because that is an attitude of sin. It's a sinful attitude, and we've got to be very, very careful not to get going. So we've got to catch ourselves. We do, because it's easy to get caught up in the idea of, oh well, they're these poor people, they're just trying to take advantage there, because we've had it happen, right? And we've seen it. But you got to remember, you imagine how many people took advantage of Jesus. How many people do you think came to Jesus to get healed or to be fed just because that's what he was doing? They didn't care about what he had. They took what he was given and probably left, didn't listen to his message. But there's still some that did, and that's the important thing that we need to make sure that we look at. And so we've got to remember that God views all people as equal, no matter what. It doesn't matter if they're a billionaire or if they only have $5 to their name. He views them all as equal, and he doesn't favor anyone, right? I guess, and if as I put in the notes, if he does, it'd be the poor and the powerless. If he did tend to do that, but I don't think God shows favorites or anything. I think he had a little bit more sympathy and a more of a heart for the poor and the powerless, and I think we should follow that example. I think we see that a lot. I mean, he could have came into when he, in his ministry, and he could have hung out with the poor or the rich a lot, and he could have, but he chose not to. He chose to spend most of his time with the poor and the powerless. And so I think we need to remember that. But we've got to remember that we need to treat all people as he would have wanted them to be treated. And so that doesn't matter if they come in smelling horrible and in raggedy clothes, or they come in and dressed to the nine and, look like they're a multi-billionaire. Either way, we should treat everyone exactly the same that comes into our realm. And so, and like I said here, we shouldn't ignore the rich. And this is not what James is saying. He's not saying you should show favoritism to the poor and ignore the rich, but he's just saying, you know, that would be withholding love if we did that. So we need to make sure we don't do that either way. And so I think this is the message that James is trying to get to in this. And so, but in the end, we must not favor them for what they can do for us while ignoring the poor, because I see that I do. I've seen that happen a lot in the church, because you get caught up in budgets, and you get caught up in the people that give, and you end up with a few people that can give a lot. And then a lot of times, for whatever reason, I don't know why people who are Christians would do this, but they tie that money a lot of times to strings and conditions, or they use it in a threatening manner, right? It's like, well, and sometimes they don't come out and say it outright, but there's implications. You hear it, you see what they're saying, and I've seen that, and that's not a Christian attitude to have at all. Right? If you're giving to the church with strings attached and things like that, then there's no Christianity, and there's no Christ-like, in that. And that's very sinful, and you shouldn't be doing that kind of stuff. And church leaders shouldn't allow that. I mean, you really shouldn't. If you allow that, then you're saying that money and that stuff's more important than actually following Christ. And so, if you're a church leader and you've gotten caught up in that, then you need to really pay a close attention to that, because it's sinful. The only way to put it is it's sinful. So we need to do that. And then finally, he talks about showing mercy to people, and it says a person who shows no mercy and compassion for people in need demonstrates that he's never responded to the great mercy of God. And so all this kind of ties into this, which we're leading up to a little bit of. James in this whole thing is saying, look, you can say you have faith, and he talks about this a lot in the book of James, but he's showing that, he's showing that, okay, you can say you're a follower of Christ, but if you're not doing these certain things, you're not truly a follower of Christ. If you're not behaving in a certain way, or if you're doing these things and not not, if you're not doing what you should be doing in a lot of these cases, then you're not a follower of Christ. Now, a lot of people say, well, then Chad, you're saying that works matter. Well, yeah, works do matter. Works don't save you. You're not going to get to heaven because of your works. The only way you're getting to heaven is through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ that you put your faith in, right? That's the only thing getting you there. But what James is pointing to, and what we're going to talk about a lot here, especially in the next couple of days, is the proof is in your faith, is in your works, right? And that's how we know faith is still legitimate. If you have a legitimate faith, then there's going to be something that produces that. And so, he's saying, look, if you have true faith, you're not going to show this type of favoritism to people. We're not going to be perfect, right? We're human beings. We mess up. We tend to do things that we shouldn't do, right? But we got to catch ourselves. We catch ourselves showing favoritism to people. We need to stop. And if we if we catch ourselves saying, hey, I really want to try to get this guy because he's got money, you need to think about that. It's like, no, we shouldn't do that. It shouldn't be a motive for trying to convert people. It should be trying to convert everyone, no matter their status. And so these are the things that James is talking about, saying, hey, yes, we're saved by our faith, but there's got to be proof of that faith. And the proof of that faith is in your works. And that's the proof that faith is alive. And we're going to talk about that more as we go through this. So I hope this helps. Again, I think there was a lot more I could have dove into this, but some of these, some of these sections are entire series that you could spend 3 or 4 weeks on. And so we're going to hit as much of this, because a lot of this stuff will come back to as we go through some of the other books that, reference certain topics that we're going to dive deeper into. But again, I hope that you're learning from these. I hope that you get something out of these as we go through them. I really do appreciate everyone who takes the time to listen to them. As always, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, I ask that you do that, because that's how we get our message out. That's how you get the alerts and notifications that we post, and when we post every single day. But I do really appreciate everyone who takes the time to watch these.